This time, Dundee United, the 1980s, the team that Big Jim built.
No, nay, never. No, nay, never, no more. 'Cause I'll stay a wild rover forever and more.
Hello and welcome to By Far the Greatest Team, a podcast in which football fans attempt the impossible to rank once and for all who is the greatest team of all time. My name's Graham Dunn, making the case for Oxford United at every opportunity, and joining me as ever is King of the Data, Jamie Rooney.
King of the solutions, I hope, but something without a solution. Graham, last week you were talking about moonlighting, the TV show, not doing a different job, which I know you go off and do after this podcast, which really disturbs me. The Ansemo case is the case you were looking for that was never solved on moonlighting, where you and Jamie got very, very excited. I kind of repressed my excitement because I did love moonlighting. I thought it was a fantastic show, but I couldn't compete with the excitement that you and Jamie had last week when we were talking about Barcelona. It was two little kids giddy on a sugar rush. Yeah, the Ansemo case.
It's difficult to quite understand, looking back now, how I managed to crowbar a reference in the moonlighting into Barcelona. There was numerous Terry Venables era. It's kind of the right sort of time frame for that. And so maybe we could do it again tonight, because almost not by accident, we are doing Dundee United. Now, Terry Venables' Barcelona side are knocked out of the UEFA Cup, I think it is, losing home and away to Dundee United. And in an unusual level of organisation, we tonight are doing the incredible Dundee United, and delighted to joining us. You've sort of become one of our Scottish football correspondents, I guess, but you know lots about football outside of Scotland, to be fair. But we welcome back Stephen Shaw.
Yeah, hi there, Graham. Hi, Jim. Yeah, thanks for inviting me back. I guess, yeah, it's kind of my sphere of small knowledge is not for the border stuff. So yeah, I'll try and chip in between you guys whenever I can.
This Dundee United side, and it's fascinating. The sort of, when we were talking about it beforehand in some of the messages, and I think, Stefan, you messaged and said, like, which bit of Dundee United are we doing? Is it just the 80s or is it the whole lot? And it is really odd that, I can't think of another team that we've done, actually, where, I think we probably just, in our shorthand, had it down as Dundee United, the Jim McLean era. That is kind of virtually all of Dundee United, isn't it?
Yeah, I was amazed at how long his reign went on for. It was quite unprecedented, I think. And obviously what tremendous success he brought to the club as well.
It is absolutely extraordinary. I was kind of fascinated by his start as well, because I didn't realise that he had mostly played for Dundee, and that's kind of where, if there was any sort of player affiliation, there was. But maybe if you were looking for a sign that his debut for Dundee as a player was in a home 5-0 defeat to Dundee United, their record ever defeat to them. So maybe there was something in the stars all along. Jamie, as a player, you looked as though you were about to add something in there, but
was I? I don't know. I don't know about. Yeah, I don't know about Jim McLean's debut. I do know a little bit about Dundee United from a very brief amount of Dundee United, but yeah, they pretty much have no any real kind of success of any note until the Jim McLean years. But it's quite interesting because they have a manager called Jerry Kerr, who looks after him from 1959, and it's the season they get promoted into the top division, the top tier in the Scottish pyramid system, and they stay there, and he's the manager for, I think, 12 or 13 years. And then in 1971, Jim McLean, is it McLean? Because I'm kind of still, I've been watching Die Hard too much. Is my pronunciation of Jim McLean surname correct? But yeah, he takes over in 1971. So you have this consistency from Dundee United where they don't really win anything. They win a few second-tier titles, but no real success of any note. And you've got these two managers that have consistency in terms of looking after the team. Yeah, I think Jim McLean is in charge for like 23 years in total. then goes on and becomes a director and chairman, and is just there for a lifetime.
Yeah, so Stefan, you can put us out of our misery. Would you go McLean or McLean?
I'd go McLean, I think. That's how I pronounce it. But it's interesting what Jimmy was saying there, that the previous manager sort of brought quite a lot of stability to the club, and he was there a long time as well. And I think for Dundee United, actually just surviving in the top tier was an achievement, really, because out of both Dundee clubs, I would say certainly in the 60s, Dundee were by far the bigger and more successful club. And I'm sure you've been checking out how well Dundee themselves did in the European Cup as well, 1963, when they got to the semi-finals, which is amazing, really. For the first time in the competition, and they get to the semi-finals, and Dundee beat some really good clubs as well. They beat like Cologne, Sporting Lisbon. They only lost out to AC Milan in the semi-finals. So, yeah, for a place like Dundee to have that success as well was quite amazing.
So it is sort of strange, actually, when given, because he is assistant manager at Dundee when the job opportunity opens up at Dundee United, and it is kind of assumed that he will take over at Dundee at some stage. Obviously, got quite a good reputation there and so forth. I guess if you viewed it in, for my entire sort of football following lifetime, Dundee United were the bigger side, but actually, it's not. That isn't the case, is it?
No, not at all. But the opposite would be true. I think that part of his decision was, I think the chairman of Dundee was quite a controlling character, and I think he certainly felt that he'd have more opportunities at Dundee United. And I think them being a smaller club at the time would have helped that as well, because he could, as we know, he went on to kind of mould the club in his own image, really. He had so much autonomy to kind of build a team and so on. And I think he did everything in the club, a bit like Ferguson would do later. Be in charge of all the contracts for the young players and things like that. He was known for putting them on big contracts. I mean, big in money, I mean, long contracts. And it's quite amazing when you look at the team. It was very much a team that grew with him, really, throughout that period.
I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary, that side which, and actually there's one or two players who I had kind of forgotten about, but for the most part, even now I could name the stalwarts of that side who played for so long, because they're really established, and they played for Dundee United almost forever. I mean, it's the most staggering thing when you look through some of those appearances. David Neri, 612, I think, all for Dundee United. Maurice Malpaz, 617, all for Dundee United. Paul Sturrock only played for Dundee United. Paul Sturrock, for my mind, played everywhere. So it is an extraordinary thing. And these, most of these players came through the youth system, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's true. And I think you've just ruled them off there. But they added Eamon Bannon to the mix. I think that was maybe the catalyst for the really great period, because he was just, well, I think he was probably just a different level, really. But again, he stayed there for ages as well. It went to Hearts, I think, and Chelsea, and hadn't really broken through it. So he was almost a lifer as well, really. Yeah.
To what extent they were lifers because they couldn't get out of Jim McLean's long-term contract? I don't know. And I did read, and we'll sort of come on to a bit about Jim McLean's character, I guess, or personality, but I read one fantastic quote from, I don't know if it was a player or it might have just been in a journalist article about him. Hopefully not the reporter he punched, but a journalist who described him as a man whose bark was definitely as bad as his, or his bite was definitely as bad as his bark, or whatever that phrase is. He was quite a dominant character, wasn't he?
Absolutely. I think that's probably an understatement. But I was looking, the description I found of him was that he was a devout, teetotal Christian, and they kind of reflected that pretty well in his management style, I think. A real disciplinarian. I listened to an interview by Paul Sturrock, and there was a lot of affection there, but he still seemed scared of him as well, Yeah. So it was that kind of old school management, absolutely.
Well, this is an extraordinary period of time as well, actually, because you touched on a bit earlier there, Stefan, is that here we come into the 1980s, where in a period which it's really, really rare to have any side that can compete with the old firm in terms of winning titles and representing Scotland in Europe and so forth. And here we are, we have two outsiders, Aberdeen and Dundee United, doing it at the same time. That's just like pretty unusual in Scottish football, isn't it?
They're obviously known as the new firm, weren't they? It was amazing to see the sort of balance of power move away from Glasgow to the northeast. Obviously, something that never really happened before. But yes, that was very interesting times. It was almost like Aberdeen and Dundee United kind of pushed themselves, become the top challengers. And Celtic and Rangers really had an uncharacteristically lean period.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've covered Scottish football previously, and Celtic and Rangers have this duopoly. But yeah, it is a bizarre time, and it's almost like you have to feel that maybe the Aberdeen and Dundee United were cursing one another because they came along at the same time to compete for championships. So Aberdeen, I think, win 3 championships in the 80s, and Dundee United, as we go on to talk about, just take the one. But in the absence of one of the others, then maybe those two teams, maybe if Fergie's Aberdeen didn't dominate the way it did in the 80s, and maybe Jim McLean would be looking at more than just a single title, because Dundee United do come close quite a few times. But yeah, it's a great time. It's a great time for me personally, because I grew up watching Scottish football in the 80s. And so I just thought this was normal, that this Celtics Rangers thing was just something that was in the past. I didn't realise that it was something that was part of the status quo, and order would be resumed in the early 1990s and would continue that way. I thought that the Scottish Premier League was open to all, and I loved the idea of Aberdeen. And I also loved the idea of Dundee United because of that tangerine strip, which was absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah, that was a fairly recent thing as well, because they didn't always play in tangerine. I think they were originally known as Dundee Hibernian, and they had the green and white, and it was only really in the 60s. I think it was Jim McLean's predecessor, Kerr, who sort of transformed the club a bit and then tried to get a bit more appeal to a wider audience, really. And I think it was his wife I really fancied the tangerine colours. So, yeah.
I very much enjoy it. I was watching some old footage, and it's great because Aberdeen and Dundee United are involved in some pretty close games and significant rivalry over that period. I saw footage of them playing each other in the orange and red kits, and you can almost not tell them apart. Yeah. I can't believe they're allowed to do that.
Yeah, it was the days of black and white televisions as well. So.
Also, and Stephen, you pointed this out, and once you pointed this out to me, I kept seeing it everywhere. And before looking into this, I've never heard Dundee United called the Arabs, but they have this nickname, the Arabs. Where does that come from?
I think it's more of the supporters of they've taken that on as their sort of collective now, really. Apparently, there's a few stories, but the one that seems to be the most credible is to do with in the 60s when they were thawing out the pitch because it was a heavy snowfall at Tannadice, and they were a bit over exuberant with a tar burner, whatever that is, and it singed all the playing surface, and so they then had to fill it in with sand. The team did really well, apparently. And so, yeah, so then it was like, yes, they're playing football like Arabs on the sand. And I think it started off as being a bit derogatory. I think Dundee fans used to call them the rivals, but they took it on board. And yeah, but you look now, I think the forum's called that as well, isn't it? So it's kind of everywhere.
Yeah, you're right. I think it is sort of carried by the Dundee United fans. And we've had plastic pitches, and there you see Dundee United innovating with the sand pitch and proving light years ahead. So Jim McLean comes in the early 70s, and it's not an immediate thing, is it? It's kind of, and obviously he doesn't really have a magic wand because I assume he's got no kind of transfer budget, judging by the reliance on youth players. And I think I saw something like of that title-winning side, only 2 of them they pay a fee for. So I think he is bringing them all in from their own. And it's sort of slowish progress, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's only really because obviously he came in 1971, and it's only really towards the end of the 70s that they were getting success. So, yeah, that's quite a long project. I think the League Cup in 1979 was the first trophy, wasn't it? So, 8 years later. So they're obviously slightly more patient in those days, I guess. But it's also probably just the stature of the club as well. I don't think they're expected to be competing, but to actually sort of compete at the top of the league, get to cup finals. I mean, that was probably exceeding expectations, really.
Yeah, he did. I think in his early days, he did take Dundee United to the Scottish Cup final. I think it was in '74. And then I think he led them early on in the mid-'70s to a top 4 finish, which I think at the time was the highest place Dundee United ever been. And he's doing this at the same time of when he's kind of creating this, as Stefan's already alluded to, this kind of youth project that he's got going on, where he's bringing in players and investing in the youngsters. And you've already mentioned most of them: Maurice Malpas, David Nery, Paul Sturrock. They all come through this youth system that Jim McLean seems to be in charge of in terms of like growing the development of players coming through the club. So I think he kind of sows the seeds in those first early years until we get to that late 1970 period that Stefan mentioned, when they get to win their first League Cup.
Yeah, and I think getting to the Scottish Cup final in 73-74 is also sort of lays another foundation of what's become a theme, which is coming second in the Scottish Cup final. It is extraordinary how many teams we keep doing this. We keep looking at teams who, in our mind, we remember as being really successful and having these great legacies. And then we did this as Don Reevy's Leeds, and then when you actually looked underneath it, you realise they did finish second quite a lot.
I think they're runners up in the actual Scottish Cup final under Jim McLean for 6 times. I might have got this wrong, but I think all of them, and maybe 5 of them, are defeats by a single goal as well. So it's like a 1-goal difference in terms of, so there's narrow defeats. But yeah, you're right, Graham. We seem to, I think we probably need to think about doing teams who actually win stuff in these podcasts rather than I'm very close to winning stuff.
There was something I read about the Hampden Hoodoo that after a while started to exist because they had, and I had to look into it to work it out. So in the Scottish Cup, they lose in 73-74, 80-81, 84-85, 86-87, 87-88, 1991. Scottish League Cup, they lose in 81-82, 85, 84-85. So there's 8 straight off the bat that they lose in finals under Jim McLean in that era. But whilst they win 2 Scottish League Cups, I think they are both on replays and they are at Dens Park. So they don't actually win any cup final for 10 cup finals at Hampden Park. So that is starting to be a bit of a theme, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that definitely nails that theory, doesn't it? Pretty well, I would say. The Hampden Hoodoo is a real thing, it sounds like.
It definitely feels that way. But I think that first Scottish League Cup win in 79-80 that's clearly the catalyst, isn't it? So, I mean, from what I can see, Dundee United have essentially not won anything before that. So winning. Now is that true, Jamie, or are you going to question that?
Yeah, they've won second tier championships. They've won a few of those prior to this. So they've won the equivalent of Division 2 in Scotland before that League Cup victory. So they have won things, but you could argue they dominate. Have one major.
According to Wikipedia, I can see they dominate with 21 wins. The Forfarshire Cup.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I wasn't going to bring that into this, but you just that. I don't really know what the Forfarshire Cup is. I'm guessing it's a county tournament. So.
Amazingly, you should look at Angus, which I think is where Forfar is, and there's an amazing amount of football clubs around that neck of the woods. Amazing, really. Brechin, Montrose are both Forfar, 2 Dundee clubs. So it's pretty competitive.
So maybe we should upgrade. Maybe there's 21 Forfarshire Cups should be given it more weight than my throwaway comment. After all,
well, there's something prominent on the Wikipedia page, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
It's like almost half a page.
We sort of started to talk about it in some of those players. I think certainly going forward, there are a string of players who stand out. But to my mind, there's a lot of defensive solidity that this is built on, and that feels like it is Paul Hegarty, David Nery, Morris Malpass, and then obviously Richard Gough comes to the party at some point. But that really seems to be a ridiculously strong base.
Yeah, absolutely. Solid foundation, isn't it, really? And it's amazing how all the players you've mentioned have onto such long careers and played for Scotland and so on. It was Dave Mary, the first Dundee United player to represent Scotland, I think. And even that was quite late. That was like 1980 something, wasn't it? So quite late on, really. But yes, they were all very consistent.
When you look through the Scottish internationals, it does for Dundee United. It does begin with that era, doesn't it? And that does speak to the point about kind of the limited football history that they'd had up until that point. And by the time you get sort of the mid '80s, you've got, it must be the most players that Dundee United ever had in the Scottish team at that stage.
Yeah, it's like a conveyor belt, really, wasn't it? I think absolutely. There's coming through it. Well, one thing you haven't mentioned is the famous goalkeeper as well, Hamish McAlpine, who went Scottish, by the way. So
you wouldn't think so with a name like that, would you?
But I do remember from growing up and watching him play. He was a real character. He's quite sort of known for coming out his box and beating attackers and stuff. And he famously had a run in the side where he took the penalties as well.
This is too good.
And I think the stats aren't that impressive. He basically scored 3 penalties, but I think he missed a very important one away to Celtic, and he was hooked from penalty duty after that. But I do remember that being a bit of a sort of St. Greavesy type, feature.
We were talking about goal scoring keepers the other couple of podcasts ago after the free scoring Alan Fettis scored for. Played out on pitch for Hull against Oxford and scored, which isn't great. But I hadn't realised Hamish McAlpine was on penalties. That's fantastic.
It's fantastic.
And this then starts to really kind of build a bit of momentum. They keep getting to Scottish Cup finals, and you can sense there's a point at which Jim McLean thinks that actually the championship, the title is there for the taking. Stefan, you mentioned Eamon Bannon. Do you see him as kind of the catalyst for what lifted that side?
I think so. I think when you're watching footage of the way the club progressed, I think it was when he signed him, he came into the team, and because I do think he was another level above. I mean, from that era, Paul Sturrock is probably my favourite of the players, just because of his style and. Who doesn't like
on the ankles?
Yeah, who doesn't like a tricky winger, really? And it was fantastic. But Bannon was just that, to me, he was just that class above, really. And, some of the goals he scored and just general play was fantastic.
Yes, you had your Davy Dodds was the kind of number 9, was the finisher in that side. Sturrock, in my mind, Sturrock was a striker, but he was a bit more. There's a bit more variety to the that. So, do you think he played wide?
Well, he certainly was good at knocking the crosses in, for sure. And that's one thing I did pick up on as well. How many of the goals were classic crosses?
Yeah,
they played that was the way they played. I think they like to get the ball forward quickly, and hit teams.
They played only through YouTube clips I've seen and also things that I've read about Jim McLean's style, obviously being very disciplined in terms of what the team is supposed to do. But there was more of a counter-attacking style to him as well. I think they were quite disciplined in defence, but then they could just explode, and there was a lot of pressing and a lot of pace. And that's where, Sturrock, his goal profile on YouTube is fantastic. He's got some amazing goals. But also they had, I think, in the great part of his career, another midfielder, a small midfielder actually, who had a spell at United briefly, Ralph Milne, who also chips in with a lot of goals as well during this period where Dundee United are starting to build up towards this league title challenge.
Chips in is the right word with Ralph Milne, because
Ralph Milne.
I'm thinking of that goal actually, but yeah,
it is absolutely blue. I was already thinking. I was watching various goals footage. I think we've all been doing ahead of this, reliving it, and Ralph Milne was someone who I don't think he passed me by at the time, but I have no sort of real memory of. And when you see the goals he scores, I mean, he's really got quite a lot of pace. And I was already thinking, having watched a few of his goals, that Milne was a bit of a player. And then the goal he gets in their title decider, which in another quirk of fate, it's an unbelievable, 3-horse race throughout the thing. 3 horses, not including Rangers. So it's Dundee United, Celtic and Aberdeen, goes right through to the wire. Their last game, Dundee United have to go to Dundee to win and be assured of winning the title. And, in those crucial games, you usually get a bit of a scrappy goal. But Milne's goal is something else, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely superb it was. And I like the build-up as well to that goal, because it's a great tackle. Maybe a Sturrock or somebody does it, and then he takes the ball, and Dundee guy literally launches himself at him, manages to bait him, and then, as you're right, it's the most sublime chip, doesn't it? And then the keeper as well. It's a great shot. The keeper scrambling to try and get at it.
Yeah.
That's an amazing goal.
You see that chip because it really is a chip, isn't it? Because it's very slow going in, which has the added benefit of the keeper almost thinking he's got a chance at least to get it back, which is an added layer of cruelty.
It is. Yeah. But no fixture computer did well that year, didn't it? I mean, what a fixture to finish on.
It's unbelievable, isn't it? You
couldn't have scripted it better.
Yeah.
But it is a fantastic finish. I think they win their last 6 games, and I think they have to win their last 6 games because Celtic and then Aberdeen in particular coming really hard and fast. I think Aberdeen win 2 or 3 games in the last few in the run-in by 5-0. So not only in Aberdeen are kind of chasing down hard, but they're also cutting down that goal difference, because the goal difference as well, not only is, the 3 teams are separated by a point, but the goal difference, I think the 3 teams are separated by 3 or 4 goals as well. It's incredibly tight for 3 teams going right to the wire.
Yeah, and the goal difference is really quite significant as well. I mean, they're all on plus 50, 55 goals as well. They finish, the 3 of them finish about 15 points ahead of anyone else. There's almost nothing between them in that final bit, and you're right. There's a point at which I think that Dundee United win those last 6 games. I think they lose to Celtic, don't they, beforehand, and that looked as though, that is going to be super significant. And then they end up playing Celtic again 3 games later and beat them. And that's the point at which they get their noses in front. And Dundee United get a couple of 4-0 wins as well, just beforehand as well. So it's, it does seem to be 3 hugely strong teams, but for Dundee United to hold their nerve during that, especially with the close fortunes they've had before when they've not been able to get over the line, and with that lack of credibility as a title winner, it's just incredible.
Yeah, it's the usual thing, isn't it? You'd always put your money on the team who's been there and done it, which both Aberdeen and Celtic had done. Dundee United, they'd never really been in that position at all. And to finish the way they did, was truly amazing, really.
And it is incredible because if there would have been, Dundee United beat Dundee 2-1 in the final game to secure the championship. And there's this incredible what if Dundee had got one back against their rivals and made it 2-2, clearly Dundee United would have been on 55 points, level with Celtic. Both Celtic and Dundee would have scored 90 goals. Both Celtic and Dundee would have conceded 36 goals. Yes. So it would be identical records. So I don't know what the qualifier would have been to determine who would have been the champions. Whether it would have gone down to a playoff, whether it had gone back to something crazy, whether they'd drawn lots or toss a coin. But if Dundee score a second goal in that game and make it 2-2, you've got the 2 teams on identical records at the end of the season, which is incredible.
Yeah, it's an amazing start, that is. Absolutely.
Yes, just a crazily tight season on there. So Dundee United win the title. It's really pretty unusual. It's not, but it's almost becoming a theme, isn't it? And it does become a theme. So because Aberdeen had already won the title by this stage.
They had, yes. Aberdeen had won the title in in 1980, and Aberdeen had also won it in 84 and 85, and with Dundee United winning it in 83 in the first 6 seasons of the 1980s. The old firm have only won 2, which is a very uncommon occurrence in Scottish football.
It's pretty extraordinary, isn't it? And given that after Aberdeen win the title in 84, 85, we fast forward 40 years and nobody's won it since, other than Suffolk Rangers. That maybe puts into perspective quite what an achievement this is.
Yeah, it really is. We've talked about this previously. The fact that there is a team or teams shaking up in Scotland and challenging the Glasgow teams that monopolise it is quite an unusual occurrence, and it's probably why we're talking about Dundee United in this podcast.
Definitely so. Now, it is an extraordinary achievement. We should really focus the entire pod on this, but we're not going to, because I think it's Dundee United's European adventures that go on to really lift this team and make this team even sweeter. And we'll talk about those in the second half. Hi, Graham here. We're just about wrapping up our plans for this current season, but we're already turning our attentions to our next season. If you've been listening, if there are some teams you would like us to cover, or would even like to come on and talk about those teams, you can contact us, drop us a line. How do they get hold of us, Jamie?
Well, they can get hold of us by using the social media accounts, X or Blue Sky, where we have the same handles. We've got yourself at Said and Dunn, and myself, Couch Pundito. So Couch Pundito at Blue Sky, and Said and Dunn at Blue Sky, or on the X, aka Twitter equivalent.
And you can also get hold of us on Insta, which I think the kids call it these days. What's our handle on that one?
Yes, we're on Instagram, where we're trying to share some of our little videos. So please give us a like, a follow, and keep in touch with our little videos. So we are on Instagram as the Greatest Team Football Podcast, or by far the Greatest Team Football Podcast. Search for either of those and you'll find us. Please follow.
Okay, so welcome back. We are talking Dundee United, the many years of Jim McLean's Dundee United, and they have already accomplished a crazy amount. By 1983, they win the Scottish Premier League. That is 12 years after he joins the club. So for a lot of people, that would be job done. Not for Jim McLean. He's going to keep going for some time yet, and his story continues. And they are, it is worth saying they are extremely reliable in domestic football at this stage. So they do keep. I think they finished second the following 2 years in which Aberdeen win. As we've discussed, they do keep getting to the final of the Scottish Cup without much luck. They do win the Scottish League Cup again. So they are. This isn't a flash in the pan, is it? This kind of one-off season.
Yeah, they. You already alluded to it, Graham. They through the 80s, Dundee United did consistently finish in the top 5 positions, primarily the top 3 positions. And as a consequence of that, incredible, and against cup finals as well. And as we discussed, they're losing them narrowly, unfortunately. So they are getting to the latter stages of cup competitions. They are competing for the league, albeit they're not winning championships like they did in 82, 83. But they are consistently one of the best teams in Scottish football. And as a prize for being so consistent in the league, they are competing in European competitions. Now, Dundee United do have a history, goes right back to the 1960s in terms of competing in competitions. And they famously beat Barcelona in their very first game in the Fairs Cup in the 1960s. They then beat Barcelona in their second game in the 1960s. And as we know, Graham, from our last week podcast with Terry Venables Barcelona, Terry Venables loses twice to Dundee United. And Dundee United have this incredible record where they have a 100% record against Barcelona. Played 4, won 4, it's pretty fantastic.
Just off the back of that, actually, I had forgotten, because that first win against Barcelona in the 60s does, of course, tie in with something we've discussed on another podcast, because Dundee United get a bit of notoriety from beating Barcelona on this run in Europe, to the extent that they get invited over to represent the Dallas Tornadoes before the Dallas Tornadoes become the Dallas Tornadoes. So, so Jamie, just quickly remind us who the Dallas Tornadoes are, or were.
Were, sadly. Rest in peace, the Dallas Tornadoes. The Dallas Tornadoes were set up in preparation of the first North American Soccer League. And the season before that, there was the United States Association League, where teams would compete across major cities. But none of the players were from the United States. The players were representative from football teams across Europe. And Dundee United represented through the summer of, I think, 66, 67 or 67, 68, the Dallas Tornado. So they competed. I don't think, from memory, Graham, they did too well in terms of how they finished. I think we probably need the great Phil Craig to talk us through the team that won that. I think it was a team from somewhere else in the US, but he likes to think Sunderland. But so Dundee United were playing in the United States. The all-conquering Dundee United to beat Barcelona. We're going to the United States, and we're part of the origins of the North American Soccer League.
They were indeed, and they play as Dallas Tornadoes. Dallas Tornadoes go off on a wonderful 6-month world tour, which we covered on a different podcast, but it's a fantastic listen. But that, I think, was the reason Dundee United kind of got recognised, was this moment in the sun they'd had against Barcelona. And actually, Stefan alluded to it with Dundee, and of course we have the Celtic Lions around this point. And in the 60s, it's actually Scottish football in teams in Europe are doing remarkably well.
Yeah, they're competing. I mean, I don't want to kind of answer your quiz question you gave me earlier, but we've talked about this previously. Hibernian were European Cup semi-finalists in the very first edition in 55, 56. Stefan's already alluded to Dundee getting to the semi-finals of the European Cup in 62, 63. And Celtic are on the charge. And also Rangers are doing well. I think Rangers won a European competition in the early 70s as well. So Scottish teams are doing really well in European competitions. They're going to the latter stages, or in the case of Celtic and Rangers, they're actually winning major European competitions.
All of this, of course, is in the past. We get to 1983-84. Dundee United's prize for winning the Scottish title is to enter the European Cup. I assume this is the only time they enter this tournament, or they're lucky enough to enter it. Would that be right, Jamie?
Yeah, it's their single time. So this is the one and only time that Dundee United are in the European Cup, which is incredible. Dundee United in the European Cup. It's absolutely incredible. It sounds amazing. But yeah, they do pretty good. They go on a pretty good run and come very, very close to making a final where they would have played Liverpool.
Yes, I mean, we'll come on to that game against Roma, which is quite an interesting one in one way or another. This is, though, something of I think you probably see it throughout football, and you've always seen it. You've definitely got a lot of memories, but it's really clear in the 1980s. It's a pattern where teams win their domestic league, go into Europe, and perform fantastically well in the European Cup, but maybe then fading off in the domestic game. Maybe there's a whole surprise element. So as you had Notts Forest winning the league in 78, 79, and then winning the European Cup. Aston Villa do the same. Even more recently, I guess you've seen with Leicester City after winning the title and then actually struggling to start, but they have a brilliant cup run. So I think maybe we shouldn't be surprised that teams do quite quite well in Europe when they finally get a chance to play there?
Yeah, I think certainly they can be a bit of a surprise package. I think that was Dundee United were doing really well in the UEFA Cup, as Jamie said, the previous couple of years. So they'd already sort of, I think, worked out how to do the two-legged games. Very much, I think it was counter-attacking away from home, and then back at Tannadice, it was just proper Scottish high-pressure football. And a lot of the continental teams weren't used to sort of playing that way, really. That worked very well for them.
It works very well for them up until the semi-final. So they draw Roma in the semi-final, and they get a brilliant start, don't they? They win the home game 2-0, and they take a 2-0 lead over to Rome. But I've seen lots of things about this, from conspiracy theories about. Who'd have thought there could be any corruption involved in Italian football? Conspiracy theories around the ref, or to the gamesmanship and the bits and pieces, or to the point that Dundee United kind of fluffed their lines a little bit in this. But it does seem to be a source of regret from the players at that time and Jim McLean that they couldn't get this one over the line.
Yeah, it was certainly a bad-tempered game, wasn't it? I think both legs were. Well, Roma accused Dundee United of being on drugs, didn't they, after the first game?
It's just iron brew.
Yeah, and I think for Roma as well, because the final was in Rome, wasn't it? So they were, they were under tremendous pressure to get there. Really, and a big club as well, playing Dundee United. It all seemed to go wrong in the second leg, and as you said, there's been, it's not just conspiracy theories, but actually the president was banned, wasn't he, for offering a bribe, at least. Did the referee take it? I don't know, but he get banned for offering it the night before in a restaurant. So that's pretty clear that there was stuff going on, really. I don't think on the day, was it the president of the Scottish Football Association wanted to start an investigation because he just felt that, Dundee United just didn't get a rub of the green at all in the second leg. They got very few decisions that went for them. And it was a penalty, wasn't it, that ultimately won the game for Roma. It would have been interesting to see Dundee United go against Liverpool in the final, wouldn't it? That would have been an interesting sort of clash of style. Battle of Britain, you love those, Graham, don't you?
Definitely. Battle, that would absolutely. Battle of Britain, that would be exactly as it was called. Well, it certainly couldn't be a worse game than Liverpool Rome. As I remember, it was a really dire game, only lifted by the I think it's called Bruce Grobbelaar's antics, isn't it? I think the first keeper to
shaky wobbly legs. Yeah. I mean, just on Roma as well, not to take away from Dundee United, which is the story we've got here. It was Roma's first time in the European Cup as well. They had never played in the competition, so you got two new teams in the competition, and I think absolutely there's definitely a case where maybe there was something going on that possibly lend itself to Dundee United being on the wrong side of some bad decisions. But yeah, I mean, Roma themselves have not got to anywhere near this stage in the European competition previously. So you got two teams going head to head in the semi-final in the European Cup. Both of them will go to a final for the very first time in their history.
So Dundee United are denied a European Cup final appearance, but it does mean, along with their extraordinarily proud record of having 100% record against Barcelona, it does mean that they have an average or record of only getting to the semi-final and nothing else to the European Cup. So that's not a bad record to maintain, isn't it?
Just like the great rivals as well, Dundee. They'll get the same record.
Wow, that is too good.
Yeah, that's actually true. And we alluded to it already, Hibernian, Dundee, and Dundee United have all played in the European Cup a single time, and all three have got to the semi-finals.
Wow, it's amazing.
There is one team that I think probably could boast a better record than that. I think Sampdoria got to the European Cup final in 1992. They lost to Barcelona in the final. That is the only time Sampdoria have been in the European Cup knockout stages or beyond. Now, they did have a playoff game about 15, 20 years ago and didn't go anywhere deep into the top, didn't even make the group stage. So Sampdoria could probably boast that they've had one European Cup venture and they actually got to the final where they lost to Barcelona. But I think the Dundee United, Dundee Hibernian story is fantastic. It's a wonderful stat that these three teams have got to a European Cup semi-final in their one and only venture in that tournament.
That is fantastic. Dundee United, though, do go one better in 1987, don't they? So this is the UEFA Cup run. And so this is, Jamie, this is where they end up playing Terry Venables Barcelona.
They do. I mean, and just to kind of bring a bit of flavour to their run as well, in 82, they get to the quarterfinals of the UEFA Cup. In 83, they get to the European Cup, the UEFA Cup, quarterfinals. In 84, they get to the semi-finals of the European Cup, as we discussed. And then in 85, 86, they get to the third round of the UEFA Cup, which is the one before the quarterfinals. And then in 1987, Graham, which you're talking about, they actually make the final of the UEFA Cup, where they play Gothenburg. And yes, they do beat Barcelona en route to that final.
Home and away. They knock someone decent out in the semi-finals as well, don't they?
Borussia Mönchengladbach, I think.
Oh, yes, Stefan, thank you. Yes, it is.
And so to some extent, having sort of almost done the hard work, this does feel like this is the moment that Dundee United are going to fulfill their destiny. And it doesn't quite happen, does it?
Very close. The two games are incredibly close. But yeah, again, they're runners-up on the wrong end of a result by the margin of one goal. They lose, I think it's the second leg they lose away 1-0, or is it they draw? I've not got this properly.
Lost in Gothenburg 1-0. So amazed actually, Gothenburg was trying to go over 50,000 in Gothenburg. So you don't think of them as being a particularly big club, do you? But so they were obviously up for it as well. So they Gothenburg win the first leg 1-0, then back to Tannadice. And really, 1-0 down. It's a pretty good chance you've got, isn't it, really? Back home with that sandy pitch, you know. But it wasn't to be.
It needs some more buckets on it. We need more buckets on it.
Yeah, it wasn't to be. I can remember watching the game, actually, and I think if memory serves me right, then Dundee United, they did everything they could. But it was just one of these nights where nothing would quite go for them. And unfortunately lost. But, other great memories then is the supporters for both teams. I think Gothenburg brought over a ferry or something, some story like that. And so they had quite a lot of fans there as well. And it's one of these where they all got on well and so on, bloody blah. And then it's the one, the Fair Play Trophy, the Dundee United fans for being such good sports afterwards. So
yeah. I mean that's
the one to win.
Yeah, I don't know what to make of getting FIFA Fair Play Trophy. I mean, I think I'd rather take the Forfarshire Cup win ahead of the World Cup.
I think they probably did that season, looking at the amount of times they won it.
That's probably, Dundee United remain a strong player throughout that. They are, they're in Europe every year, aren't they, Jamie?
It's quite incredible what Jim McLean does. 19 seasons, he takes Dundee United into European competitions. Dundee United have only been in European competitions in their whole entire history for 27 seasons to this point. So it really is an incredible spell. And 16 of those seasons are consecutive. From 1975 through to 1991, Dundee United are consistently competing in European competitions, which is a reflection that they're going deep into cups and winning them, or they're finishing in the top 3-4 positions in the league, because that's what you need to do to qualify for European competitions. So what that tells us is that this is a consistently performing team. And as you said at the top of this, guys, Jim McLean's been there forever, but you've also got players like Maurice Malpass and Paul Sturrock and David Neri that just have their whole careers during this time as well. It's not like Jim McLean is kind of building new teams in his 20-year spell in charge. He's actually milking some of these players to the end for their careers, doing incredible jobs.
The the level of continuity is absolutely extraordinary. So that 87 cup final, sadly, Hamish McAlpine, the penalty taker extraordinaire, is no longer playing by then, but Maurice Malpas, David Neri, Paul Hegarty, Eamon Bannon, Paul Sturrock, all starting that first leg of the 87 UEFA Cup final. That it is the same body. I think Richard Gough has left by then. It is interesting how few players kind of from that team tested themselves anywhere else. Richard Gough is probably the prime example of someone who went off.
He's a really interesting example because we've talked about this a number of times in this period, Graham. We seem to kind of gravitate towards the 1980s to these teams that we do. But we've done a few English teams, or we've done a few teams outside England where English players have gone to play for other teams outside England in the late 1980s because there's no European football in England. Richard Gough has done the reverse. He's playing in a team that's consistently getting into Europe, that's consistently challenging for league titles and getting to cup finals. And he's gone down to England where there's no European football to play for a team that doesn't historically win many trophies in Tottenham Hotspurs. It's a really interesting difference when we compare the Glenn Hoddle going to France, with Chris Waddle going to France. And also, I think there were lots of players going to Scotland. I think Mark Walters and players of such, I think around about this time, were moving from the English game to the Scottish game because they could play European football. So yet you've got Richard Gough who's doing the reverse of that.
Yeah, I think it's all beginning to change now, wasn't it? I think Rangers were beginning to, they had quite deep pockets, so that they managed to sign quite a lot of top internationals from, Mark Caton, I think, was one of the big ones, wasn't it? Yeah. I think probably that was Dundee United's probably getting on the slide a little bit now, and, it's probably more difficult to retain the players then. And I think Richard Gough was, he was possibly a slight class above as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. We're getting into the Walter Smith years, aren't we, for Rangers, I think, where Rangers go on the 9 championships in a row? We're not far from the beginning of that, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so it was another sort of dominance from the Glasgow clubs again. Yeah, I guess you get to that point where the sort of the new firm is kind of waning now. The old power is back in the throne,
So Jim McLean, he has, I think, it's at least 22 years at the club, and it's maybe 23 years as manager. Put it into sort of current money, so to speak. That's 25 Watford managers over the last. that is how many Watford managers. That's actually how many Watford managers there've been in the last 22 years. So that's the kind of reign we are talking about, and there aren't many people who've managed a club more than this. I think it is, my little research on it was that it was maybe the 11th longest serving British club manager. So there's one or two
all time, Graham. I mean, your research is nailed. You've nailed it. It's all time 11th longest serving manager, I think, in the history of the game worldwide, not just British.
Well, okay. So is there anyone we'd have heard of above him?
Yeah, there is. Arsene Wenger. So Jim McLean does, I think, 22 years. Wenger does around about 22 years, but beats him by a few days. Obviously, Alex Ferguson is up there with 26 and a half years. But there's a fella from France, a very famous guy called Guiraud. He was in charge of Auxerre for 36 years. And I think what makes Guiraud and Jim McLean unique is that they were in charge of the same club for that period of time and didn't manage anyone else. Now, there's a Guiraud came out of retirement and managed for a few months with Lens, but by and large, he was at Auxerre 36 years. Now, Jim McLean is at Dundee United for his entire career, doesn't manage anyone before and doesn't manage anyone after. That's incredibly unique. 22 years with the same club and no career before or after in terms of managerial positions. It's pretty unique in football. It's something that you don't really hear about at all, really.
Basically, his first major job, wasn't it, Dundee United? His first job as manager. And that's really, as long as there's a stepping stone thing, isn't there? Like, if you look at Alex Ferguson, he started very, very sort of low down at East Stirling and then worked his way up to St Mirren and Aberdeen. Man United are always progressing. But yeah, with Jim McLean, it's quite unusual that way. That it's obviously, like I say, I think it's so much influence on the will of the club that's kind of what kept him there. I mean, apparently he did have quite a lot of job offers. He reckon he did 14 job offers he turned down. Mostly Rangers, probably. They came back every couple of years to try and get him. But also, apparently, he almost went to Wolves, Newcastle, and Toronto Blizzard. So.
Oh, Toronto Blizzard, that would be fantastic. Wow, that would be awesome. I think this says, I mean, we haven't really talked about his character so much, Jim McLean, but obviously you can tell for when you've already alluded to it when Paul Sturrock's talking about Jim McLean, how he still has that respect, almost that fear factor, because the way that he managed in terms of he seemed to be quite strict, a disciplinarian in terms of how he wanted teams to play, but he guaranteed he got respect as well. But I think this not moving clubs when he was, as you rightly said, Stefan, had loads of offers, probably says about his character, because I think I read when he was offered a role at Rangers, I think in the mid-'80s, probably before Walter Smith, and could have built an empire at Rangers. He mentioned his family was settled and he didn't want to upset the kind of the family dynamic that he had at home. And I think that's a real commendable quality, because as we know, football players, football managers can be moved from one part of the world to another part of the world at a minute's notice. The fact that he was prepared to stand by his family setup, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but that feels like that was the case of why he was happy with Dundee. Or maybe he was just quite happy playing the Matthew Le Tissier card and being the big fish in the little pot. I doubt that's the case, but that's just me making a cheeky reference about Matt Le Tissier.
And also, I think he talks about the quality of life on the East Coast. So obviously, I must have loved living in Dundee. Each to their own, really.
Well, worth mentioning, of course, that throughout this period, he kind of not locked horns too badly, but his brother was also a very successful footballer and a manager in Scottish football during this period, Tommy McLean.
Yeah, I think Tommy McLean had a better playing career. I think he's a Rangers player I think had a lot more success than Jim McLean did. But as you say, yeah, they went on to manage quite a few clubs in there, most notably Motherwell. I think that's what sticks in my mind. So yeah, there were great rivals as well at the top level.
Most sort of famously, of course, whilst at Motherwell, Tommy McLean wins the silverware, wins the Scottish Cup with a defeat over Dundee United. So I'm sure that one went down well on the McLean family. We were talking about Gavin and Lee Johnson being in not Gavin Johnson, Gary and Lee Johnson managing in opposite dugouts, father and son. But it's quite impressive to have brothers managing the opposite sides in a cup final. That is quite an achievement, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't know if that's happened before, actually. That's a really good stat, Graham. I like that.
I should have thought of it earlier. Then you could have prepped. That's the tagline. That's the tagline for this podcast. Should have thought about it earlier. We could have prepped. I'm struggling to think of another club where you have this level of continuity, where you have Jim McLean there. So he's manager for 20 years. He becomes chairman afterwards for another. His association there's for another 20 years or so before it slightly unsavoury. It's an unsavoury end with an incident with a reporter, but he is that football club.
Sorry, he ended up owning it as well, didn't he? Or owning 42% of the club.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
Incredible. I was going to say incredible legacy, but Dundee United, this doesn't last, does it?
No, I think it's a different era, isn't it, really? Because just looking at the team sheet, I mean, Dundee United were all Scottish, pretty much. All Scottish players. Gothenburg were all Swedes, pretty much. So it's a different game now, really. I think there's a lot more players move around a lot more and stuff. So I think finances probably kind of matters more now, possibly in terms of the teams with the deepest pockets are, especially Scottish football. You've got the old firm kind of hoovering up a lot of the talent. I think, maybe in those days the wages weren't so disparate maybe between the clubs, so they could hold on to the youngsters. But I think these days, as soon as a youngster shows promise, then, they get snapped up, don't they?
It's also pre-Bosman as well, which I think is a big contributor to how football changes everywhere, but definitely in Scotland in terms of it opens up a different market for Celtic and Rangers to pretty much go and buy the talents around the world. And as we know from these things before, Celtic and Rangers dominate the money in Scotland, and the Dundee Uniteds and the Aberdeens and the Hibernians and Hearts only get like a small portion of the wealth. So they are able to compete. So it is a changing time, but it's a great 1980s where you've got. I like it. I never realised they were called the New Firm. That's brilliant, Stefan. I never realised that those two, Dundee United, Aberdeen, were called that. That's wonderful.
It's definitely a brief or a moment in history. I suspect in the modern age of social media and keyboard warriors, you wouldn't get a manager lasting for. I'm not sure we're going to see 23 years or something.
I don't think it's going to happen, Graham. I really don't think. I think that this is a bygone era in football. I think if you look at the longest serving managers now, I mean, the top 10 will have managers that have been in jobs for like 18 months. It's crazy.
Different times. Right. We should get to ranking this team as a... Oh, I can see Jamie's already struggling with this. And we have 5 categories of greatness, from all-time greats at the top. True greats are our second tier, then our middle category, touch of greats, edge of greats, and then at the bottom, blink of greats. Jamie, I always start with you as tradition, so go on.
Yeah, this is a tough one. I think we've got a fairly unique story here because we've got a football manager that is in his role for 2 decades. He's single-minded in terms of what he wants to achieve, but he's very clear in terms of how he can communicate that to a bunch of players that stick with him for the duration of time. They compete in the Scottish League and win a championship where they've got no history of doing that previously. They're in Europe consistently for almost 2 decades as well in terms of competing against some of the best in Europe, and they get, as we talked about, to a UEFA Cup final and a European Cup semi-final. I mean, they win 1 league and they win 2 League Cups in this whole period of the 22 years with Jim McLean. But they come incredibly close and they're incredibly consistent. I think they have a top 5 finish in 18 seasons, which is incredible consistency. I mean, lots of football teams would love to have a top 5 finish in the top league for 18 seasons. It's pretty unique. So I'm going to kick us off. And it is difficult because we are talking about Dundee United, 1982, 1987, but we are talking about Jim McLean because he is absolutely, essentially linked to the success of this football team. And it's his vehicle that kind of guides them to where they go to. So I'm going to kick us off with, I think this is probably a touch of greatness, Graham, tier 3.
Touch of greatness. Go on, Stefan.
Yeah, I think that's a good show. I was almost going to elevate it to the true, but I think touch of greatness is probably bang on. Just purely because there were, unfortunately, there was still a bit of a nearly club. Really, they've got what ifs, European Cup semi-final and the sort of the Hampden hoodoo as well is a bit of an Achilles heel for them. Really, that championship was amazing, and yeah, such a shame Aberdeen were around at the same time because they could have done so much more. I think you're right, fantastic players, but yeah, I think that's about right.
Like you, I was very tempted by true greats because I think if you look at what Dundee United, this is an underdog story, but an underdog story who do really well for like 15 years, and it's all down to this one era. So in terms of legacy, it really is, there's a very good case for it. But ultimately, they do kind of miss out on their trophy haul. Having got into this position is maybe a little disappointing at the end of it. But I'm going to go with Nemesis. I'll say Dundee United 82 to 87. Touch of great.
You guys had me go for true, I have to say, after that. And I was kind of thinking it back as well. They are going against Celtic and Rangers and Alex Ferguson's Aberdeen. It's a tough time to win stuff, and they are winning stuff.
It is, but they lost the Scottish Cup final to St Mirren. There's there's a few of them that there's a few of them that really, yeah.
True.
Yeah, it's harsh.
Walk
It's
back down
definitely
to
harsh. What we have to make sure is we don't go and rank a team that only wins one tournament higher than that.
Yeah, good luck with that, Graham.
Our rankings are all over the place. We'll have to kind of work that at some point. But excellent, Stefan. Thank you so much. I sort of really enjoyed this story and memory of this Dundee United side. They've got such iconic players. I suppose this is true of all 80s teams, but you can really remember players, Dundee United players, because they almost didn't have anyone else for 10 years.
It's a great time as well to be, because that's kind of when I was growing up watching football this era, very much so. So it was I really enjoyed going back over the old YouTube clips and stuff. Some good stuff out there just to refresh your memory of actually how amazing it was, really. So that's been great. So thank you for inviting me, guys. Much enjoyed it.
Good stuff. Jamie, thank you as ever.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, thanks again, Stefan. That's brilliant, bringing this Dundee United team to life. And you're right, it was a period that I remember as well in the 1980s where you tune into like St. Ingreasy or Football Focus, and it felt, I don't know if this was the case, but it felt like Scottish football was on parity with English football. It would get the same coverage, and Dundee United and Aberdeen would get the same coverage of, as Arsenal or Luton Town, who were competing in the top league of that particular period. Yes, it's good memories, and I do remember Paul Sturrock and loving Paul Sturrock. Absolutely fantastic player.
So Dundee United and Aberdeen, they was this golden period of teams that broke the old firm grip on the Scottish title. Previous team who had won it was Kilmarnock in 1965, and we will be doing the brilliant Kilmarnock side of 1965 in a pod in 2 or 3 weeks' time. We do have, before that, we will be doing the incredible Greece team that won the Euros so spectacularly in 2004, and we're getting ever closer to the mighty 1986 Oxford United Milk Cup winning side.
Who we've already ranked, Graham, by the way.
Gonna correct a wrong. So we will see you again next time.